The diplomatic station hung in the void between stars, a massive wheel of metal and glass, where dozens of species came to trade and talk and sometimes argue about matters that affected entire star systems. Dr. Sarah Chen walked through the common area with her datapad, reviewing notes about Carthax social behavior and pack dynamics. She had been studying the predator species for 3 months now, and still found their rigid hierarchy fascinating, if somewhat brutal. Fled through the nearest exit, and Sarah understood why. Because adult Carthax were known to go into killing rage if anyone threatened their young. But the cub on the bottom was dying. She could see the dark blood pooling on the pristine floor, and hear the wet choking sounds it made as it struggled. Sarah did not think. She moved. Her hand closed around the scruff of the attacking cub, and she hauled it backward with enough force to break its grip, while her other hand grabbed the injured one and pulled it away. For a moment, both cubs hung in her grasp, suspended by the loose skin at the backs of their necks, and too shocked to resist. The attacking cub recovered first and tried to twist around to bite her, but Sarah adjusted her grip, her fingers finding the precise spots along its spine where pressure would cause pain without permanent damage, and the cub went still with a whimper. The injured cub was bleeding badly from its neck and shoulder, so Sarah lowered it, carefully, to the ground. While maintaining her hold on the aggressor, she pulled off her jacket with her free hand and pressed it against the worst of the wounds. That was when War Leader Cross arrived. The adult Carthax stood nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder. His armor-plated hide was covered in scars from 100 battles, and his eyes glowed with predatory intelligence as he took in the scene before him. Sarah met his gaze and did not look away, which later she would learn was either very brave or very stupid when dealing with Carthax pack leaders. Cross approached slowly, his claws clicking on the metal floor, and every muscle in his powerful body was coiled tight with tension. But Sarah held her ground, with one hand still gripping the aggressor cub and the other pressing her jacket against the injured one's wounds. "Release my sons," Cross said in heavily accented but clear standard. His voice was like gravel grinding against stone. "One needs medical attention," Sarah replied, her own voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "The other one will attack again if I let go." Cross's eyes narrowed, and for a long moment the only sound was the labored breathing of the injured cub. Then the war leader did something unexpected. He laughed. It was not a pleasant sound, more like rocks tumbling down a mountain, but there was genuine amusement in it. "You are either very foolish or very brave, human," Cross said as he moved closer. "My enhanced vision shows me something interesting." Sarah waited, her grip never loosening on either cub. "Your hands are positioned to kill," Cross continued, his head tilting as he studied her. "One twist and both their necks would snap. You have the strength and you have the knowledge of where to apply pressure." Sarah had not realized it herself until he said it, but her training in xenobiology included detailed anatomy studies, and her hands had automatically found the killing points on both cubs. "But you did not kill them," Cross said, something like respect entering his voice. "You stopped the fight, and you are trying to save the injured one, even though he is not of your species." "They are children," Sarah said simply. "I do not kill." "Children?" The adult Carthax stared at her for what felt like an eternity, his predator eyes taking in every detail of her face and body language and scent. "Come with me," Cross finally said. "Bring both cubs. Medical team is already on the way." Sarah carefully released the aggressor cub, but kept herself between it and its injured sibling. The young Carthax shook itself and growled, but did not attack again. And within moments, a medical team arrived with floating stretchers. The injured cub was stabilized and taken away while the aggressor was escorted by 2 adult Carthax guards, and Sarah was left facing War Leader Cross in the now empty common area. "We will speak privately," Cross said. It was not a request. He led her to a meeting room with walls that seemed to absorb sound. Once inside, he sealed the door and turned to face her with his full attention. "Tell me about your world," he commanded. Sarah took a breath and began to explain Earth. She told him about the crushing gravity that was nearly twice what most spacefaring species evolved under, and the countless predators that hunted in every environment, from deep oceans to high mountains. She told him about diseases that could kill in hours, weather systems that could level entire cities, and tectonic activity that reshaped continents. Cross listened without interrupting, but his expression grew more skeptical with each detail. "Your people evolved in this environment," he said when she finished. "Yet you appear soft and weak, with no natural weapons." "We did not need claws or fangs," Sarah replied. "We evolved something better." "What could be better than natural weapons?" Cross demanded. "Endurance," Sarah said. "We can run for days without stopping. We can survive injuries that would kill most species. And we can adapt to almost any environment, given time." Cross snorted, clearly unconvinced. "I challenge you to prove this," he said. "Tomorrow we will meet in the Variable Gravity Gymnasium, and you will demonstrate these claims." Sarah nodded. "I accept your challenge." As she left the meeting room, Sarah wondered what she had gotten herself into. But she also felt a strange excitement, because for the first time since arriving at the station, someone was taking humanity seriously. The next morning would either validate her species' reputation or make her look like a fool in front of one of the galaxy's most feared predator races. She spent the evening reviewing human physiological data and preparing for what she suspected would be less a demonstration and more a test of whether humans deserved respect or dismissal in Cross's eyes. The station's night cycle found her lying awake, thinking about those two cubs, and the precise way her hands had found the killing points on their necks, without conscious thought. Humanity had evolved as persistent hunters, wearing down prey over impossible distances until exhaustion made the kill easy. But they had also evolved as protectors of their young, and somewhere along the way, that protection instinct had expanded to include the young of other species. Tomorrow, she would show War Leader Cross what humans were really capable of, and perhaps begin to bridge the gap between two very different kinds of predator. The Variable Gravity Gymnasium occupied an entire section of the station's lower levels, a vast chamber where different species could train under their native conditions, and War Leader Cross stood waiting when Sarah arrived. A dozen Carthax warriors lined the observation platform above, and their eyes glowed with predatory interest as Sarah entered wearing standard exercise clothing. "We begin at standard galactic gravity," Cross announced, his voice echoing in the chamber. "0.6 of your Earth standard." The gravity shifted, and Sarah immediately felt lighter, as if she had shed half her body weight, and she moved to the center of the training floor where Cross had set up a series of strength assessment devices. "Lift this," he commanded, gesturing to a bar loaded with weights that Sarah estimated at around 200 kilograms. She approached the bar and gripped it properly, then lifted it overhead in one smooth motion, and held it there while Cross circled her like a predator examining prey. "Again," he said, 20 times. Sarah performed 20 overhead presses without significant strain. Her breathing remained steady, and her form stayed perfect throughout. Finished, she set the bar down gently, rather than dropping it. The Carthax warriors above murmured among themselves. Cross increased the weight to 300 kilograms, and Sarah lifted it 10 times. Then he increased it again to 400, and she managed 5 repetitions before her muscles began to protest. "Endurance test," Cross said, pointing to a circular track that ran around the gymnasium perimeter. "Run until you cannot continue." Sarah began to run at a steady pace, not sprinting, but maintaining a speed that would have been impressive for most species, and she kept that pace for an hour, while Cross watched with growing interest. After an hour, she was breathing hard but still running. After 2 hours she had settled into a rhythm that she could theoretically maintain for much longer. And the Carthax warriors had stopped talking, and were simply watching in silence. Cross finally called a halt, after 3 hours, and Sarah slowed to a walk. Her shirt was soaked with sweat, but she was still functional and alert. "Impossible," one of the younger warriors muttered from above. "No species can maintain that pace for so long." "Humans can," Sarah said between breaths. "We evolved to chase prey across entire continents until it collapsed from exhaustion." Cross's tail lashed back and forth, a sign of agitation or excitement that Sarah had learned to recognize. "Now we test at your native gravity," he said, and the chamber's gravity increased, until Sarah felt the familiar weight of Earth pressing down on her. The Carthax warriors above suddenly struggled to stand, their powerful legs trembling under the increased load, and 2 of them actually collapsed to their knees. Cross remained standing, but Sarah could see the strain in every muscle of his body as he fought against gravity that was nearly twice what his species evolved under. "The weight test again," Cross growled through clenched teeth. Sarah approached the 400-kilogram bar and lifted it overhead, this time with more effort, but still manageable, and she performed 5 repetitions, while Cross watched with something like awe in his predator eyes. "You live your entire lives under this crushing weight," he said. It was not a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. "Every human child grows up fighting against Earth's gravity," she replied. "It makes us strong in ways that are not immediately obvious." Cross tried to move toward her, but his legs buckled, and he went down on one knee, snarling in frustration at his body's limitations. "Reduce gravity," he commanded, and the pressure eased back to galactic standard. The relief on the Carthax warriors' faces was immediate and obvious. They had just experienced a tiny fraction of what humans dealt with every single day of their lives. "Your species evolved as persistence predators," Cross said, his respect now clear in his voice. "Chase and you endure, and you never stop until your prey falls." "Yes," Sarah agreed, "but we also learned something else." "What?" Cross demanded. "We learned when to stop chasing," Sarah said quietly. "We learned that some prey should not be hunted and some fights should not be fought." Cross's eyes narrowed. "You speak of my sons." "I speak of children," Sarah corrected. "Your sons were fighting over dominance, and in Carthax culture that is normal, but one of them was going to die." "The weak must be culled," Cross said, but there was less conviction in his voice than before. "Is that what you believe?" Sarah challenged. "That your injured son is weak and deserves death?" Cross was silent for a long moment, his claws scraping against the gymnasium floor. "His name is Ven," the war leader finally said. "The aggressor is Rask, and they are my only cubs." Sarah waited, sensing that Cross needed to speak. "My mate died bringing them into this world," Cross continued, his voice rough with old pain. "I have raised them alone, according to our traditions. But yesterday, when I saw them fighting, I felt something I have never felt before." "What did you feel?" Sarah asked gently. "Fear," Cross admitted. "Not of death in battle, but of losing them both to our own traditions." Sarah moved closer, careful not to appear threatening. "Then perhaps it is time to question those traditions." Cross looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You stopped the fight, and you could have killed them both, but instead you tried to save Ven, even though his blood was all over your hands." "Yes," Sarah said simply. "Why?" Cross demanded. "They are not your species, not your pack, and you owed them nothing." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "On Earth we have a saying, 'It takes a village to raise a child,' and we learned long ago that protecting the young, all young, makes our entire species stronger. This is not the Carthax way," Cross said. "Maybe the Carthax way needs to evolve," Sarah suggested. You are apex predators from a harsh world, but you have conquered dozens of systems and built a mighty fleet. What comes after conquest? Cross tilted his head, clearly thinking about her question. After conquest comes maintenance of power, he said. We hold what we have taken through strength. And what have you built? Sarah asked. What have you created that will outlast your current generation? The question seemed to strike Cross deeply because he turned away from her and looked up at his warriors, who were listening intently to every word. We have built nothing, he admitted. We take and we hold, but we do not create. Sarah moved to stand beside him. Humanity nearly destroyed itself multiple times before. We learned to channel our predatory instincts into creation instead of destruction. You are saying we should become weak, one of the warriors above challenged. No, Sarah said firmly. I am saying you should become strong in new ways. Strength is not just the ability to kill, but the wisdom to know when not to. Cross turned back to her. You wish to teach this to my sons. If you will allow it, Sarah replied. The war leader was silent for what felt like an eternity, his predator mind clearly weighing costs and benefits. The other Carthax will see this as weakness, he finally said. There will be challenges to my authority. Are you strong enough to face those challenges? Sarah asked. Cross's laugh was like thunder. I am war leader of the Third Fleet. I have killed more enemies than you have years of life. Then you are strong enough to try something new, Sarah said with a slight smile. Cross regarded her for another long moment, then nodded slowly. You may work with Rask and Ven, but I will be watching, and if I see them becoming weak, I will end this experiment. Fair enough, Sarah agreed. When can I start? Tomorrow, Cross said. Ven is still recovering, but Rask needs to learn control before he kills his brother. As Sarah left the gymnasium, she felt the weight of what she had agreed to settling onto her shoulders. And this was about more than two young Carthax. This was about whether two predator species could learn from each other. 3 months had passed since Sarah began working with Rask and Ven, and the changes in the two young Carthax were remarkable enough that other species on the station had started to notice. The cubs met her every morning in a training room that War Leader Cross had designated for their use. At first, Rask had been hostile, and Ven had been fearful. But Sarah's patience and consistent approach had gradually won them over. Today's lesson involved a complex puzzle that required both cubs to work together. A series of locked containers that could only be opened if they coordinated their efforts. Rask, you need to hold that lever down, while Ven opens the upper latch, Sarah instructed, watching as the cubs struggled with the concept of cooperation. Rask growled in frustration. I should be able to open it myself. But you cannot, Sarah pointed out calmly. Sometimes strength alone is not enough. Ven, who had recovered from his injuries, but still bore the scars along his neck and shoulder, moved to help his brother, and together they managed to open the first container, which held a treat they both enjoyed. See, Sarah said, working together gets better results than fighting. Over the following hour, the cubs opened all 6 containers, and by the end they were coordinating without prompting, and even seemed to be enjoying the collaboration. War Leader Cross observed from the doorway. He came to most of their sessions, but rarely interfered, and Sarah could see him processing what he witnessed with the analytical mind of a military commander. After the session ended, and the cubs left with their escort, Cross approached Sarah. Other young Carthax have been watching, he said without preamble. They see Rask and Ven cooperating, and they are curious. Is that a problem? Sarah asked. Cross's tail lashed back and forth. It is becoming one. Commander Threx has noticed, and he is not pleased. Heard of Threx. He was second in command of the Third Fleet, and a traditionalist who believed that Carthax strength came from their rigid hierarchy and willingness to cull weakness. What does Threx want? She asked carefully. He wants you removed from the station, Cross said bluntly. He believes you are corrupting our young and weakening our species. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. And what do you believe? Cross was quiet for a long moment, his predator eyes studying her face. I believe my sons are stronger now than they were 3 months ago, but not in ways our traditions value. Strength comes in many forms, Sarah said. Yes, Cross agreed. You have shown me this, and I have been studying human history in my private time. This surprised Sarah. What have you learned? I have learned that your species nearly destroyed itself multiple times, Cross said. Wars that killed millions, weapons that could have ended all life on your world. Came closer to extinction than most species ever do. That is true, Sarah admitted. But you stopped, Cross continued. You chose cooperation over continued conflict, and in doing so, you became stronger. Sarah nodded. It was not an easy choice, and many humans died before we learned. The Carthax have never faced such a choice, Cross said thoughtfully. We have conquered but never been truly challenged, and perhaps that is why we have become stagnant. Before Sarah could respond, an alert chimed on Cross's communicator, and his expression darkened as he read the message. Threx has issued a formal challenge, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. He demands ritual combat for leadership of the fleet. Sarah understood the implications immediately. If Threx won, he would have the authority to remove her and reverse all the progress made with the cubs. When? She asked. 3 days from now, Cross replied. It will be held in the Grand Arena, and all Carthax on the station will attend. Can you win? Sarah asked directly. Cross's laugh was without humor. Threx is younger and perhaps faster, but I have more experience. It will be close. Over the next 3 days, Sarah continued working with the cubs while trying not to let her worry show. And Rask and Ven seemed to sense that something was wrong, because they were more attentive than usual. On the morning of the combat, War Leader Cross came to the training room alone. Whatever happens today, I want you to know that you have given me hope, he said to Sarah. You have shown me that there might be another path for my people. You will win, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. Perhaps, Cross replied, but if I do not, you must leave the station immediately, because Threx will not show you the mercy I have. The Grand Arena was a massive circular chamber designed for Carthax ritual combat. Tiered seating rose on all sides, and hundreds of Carthax had gathered to witness the challenge. Sarah sat in a section reserved for non-combatants, with Rask and Ven beside her, under guard, and the cubs were trembling with anxiety as they watched their father enter the arena. Commander Threx stood waiting at the arena center. He was indeed younger than Cross, and his hide bore fewer scars, but his eyes held a fanatic gleam that Sarah found disturbing. The combat began with a formal declaration of terms, and then the two Carthax warriors launched themselves at each other with terrifying speed and power. The fight was brutal and primal. Claws raked across armored hide, and teeth sought vulnerable throats, while both combatants moved with the lethal grace of born predators. Of experience, and he used it well, anticipating Threx's moves and countering with precision strikes. But Threx was faster, and his attacks came in relentless waves. The crowd roared with each exchange, caught up in the ancient ritual of leadership through combat. Sarah watched with growing dread as both warriors accumulated injuries. Blood darkened their hides, and their movements began to slow from accumulated damage. Then Threx did something that made the crowd gasp. He used a prohibited strike that targeted the joints rather than the armored hide, and Cross's rear leg shattered with a sound like breaking stone. The war leader went down hard, unable to rise on 3 legs, and the arena fell silent as everyone realized what had happened. Threx should have been disqualified for the illegal move, but no one spoke up, perhaps because they feared him, or perhaps because they wanted to see what would happen next. Cross struggled to stand, but his shattered leg would not support his weight, and he collapsed again, while Threx circled him with predatory satisfaction. "The old ways die today," Threx announced to the crowd, "and with them dies the corruption of weak human philosophy." He moved in to deliver the killing blow that was his right by combat law. Rask and Ven broke free from their guards with desperate strength. They rushed toward their father, but they were cubs facing an adult warrior. Threx backhanded both cubs aside, almost casually, and Sarah heard the crack of Ven's ribs breaking and saw Rask tumble across the arena floor. Later, security footage would show that Sarah crossed 15 meters in 2.3 seconds. She moved faster than most species could track. Her Earth-evolved muscles unleashing power that the station's standard gravity made even more devastating. Her hand closed around Threx's striking arm mid-swing, and she stopped his killing blow with a grip that dented his armored hide. The entire arena froze in shocked silence. Threx stared at the human female who had caught his full-power strike as if it were nothing, and for the first time in his life, he felt something unfamiliar. He felt fear. Sarah looked into his eyes and spoke quietly, but her voice carried in the silent arena. "You want to teach strength? Then let me show you what real strength looks like." She did not break his arm, though she clearly could have. Instead, she squeezed just hard enough to make him drop to his knees from the pain. "Strength is protecting those who cannot protect themselves," Sarah continued. "Strength is choosing mercy when you have the power to destroy." She released Threx and immediately moved to where the cubs lay injured, kneeling beside them and checking their wounds with gentle hands that moments before had stopped a Carthax warrior. Threx remained kneeling, his mind unable to process what had just happened. The crowd erupted in chaos, some shouting for Sarah's death, while others demanded answers about what they had just witnessed. Sarah ignored them all, focused entirely on stabilizing Ven's broken ribs and checking Rask for internal injuries. Medical teams rushed in, but Sarah had already done the critical first aid, and both cubs would survive. Commander Threx slowly stood and backed away, his certainty shattered along with his pride, and without another word he fled the arena. The emergency meeting of the Carthax High Council convened within hours of the arena incident, and the council chamber was filled with heated debate that sometimes threatened to become physical confrontation. Sarah stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the most powerful Carthax in the fleet, while above her, in tiered seating, council members argued about what her actions meant. "She violated sacred combat," one elder roared. "The human must be punished." "She saved war leader Cross's life," another countered, "and protected cubs from an illegal strike." "Threx used prohibited techniques," a third pointed out. "The combat was already compromised." Sarah remained quiet and still, knowing that any movement might be interpreted as aggression by the predators surrounding her. War leader Cross sat in the medical section, his shattered leg immobilized in a regeneration field, and despite his injuries, he had insisted on attending the council. "The human acted to protect the young," Cross said, his voice carrying authority even from his injured position. "This is not a crime under our laws." "But she interfered in ritual combat," the first elder insisted. "This cannot be ignored." An ancient Carthax named Vrask rose slowly from his seat. His hide was so scarred that barely any original armor plating showed, and one of his eyes was missing, replaced by a mechanical implant that glowed red in the chamber's light. "Ancient wars, ruined cities, weapons of terrible power. The humans nearly destroyed themselves," Vrask continued. "Their wars killed hundreds of millions, and their weapons could have ended all life on their world." The council watched the images in fascinated horror. "But they stopped," Vrask said. "They chose cooperation over destruction, and in doing so, they transformed from a species that would have burned out in violence to one that now reaches for the stars. He turned to look directly at Sarah. "Tell us, human, what made your people change?" Sarah took a breath, knowing that her answer might determine not just her fate, but the future relationship between humans and Carthax. "We learned that strength without wisdom is just violence," she said carefully. "And wisdom without strength is just words, but together they create something greater." "Philosophy," one council member scoffed. "We are warriors, not philosophers," challenged, looking around the chamber. "Because warriors fight, but you have conquered dozens of systems and built a mighty fleet. What do you fight for now?" The question hung in the air. "We fight to maintain our power," one elder said defensively. "And what do you do with that power?" Sarah pressed. "What have you created? What legacy will you leave?" Vrask's single eye gleamed with something like approval. "The human asks the question that I have been asking myself for decades." He turned back to the council. "We have been stagnant for generations. We conquer, but we do not build, and we maintain tradition, but we do not evolve." "You speak of abandoning our ways," another elder protested. "I speak of expanding them," Vrask corrected. "The human has not made Rask and Ven weak. She has taught them to channel their strength in new directions." The debate raged on for hours, with some council members demanding Sarah's immediate expulsion, while others argued for allowing her work to continue. Finally, Vrask raised his hand for silence. "I propose a trial by philosophy," he announced, "an ancient tradition that we have not used in 3 generations." The council chamber erupted in surprised murmurs, because trial by philosophy was reserved for matters that could not be settled by combat or simple debate. "The human will defend her people's approach against our traditional values," Vrask explained. "If she succeeds, humanity will be recognized as equals, and her work with the cubs will continue under council oversight." He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "If she fails, humanity will be marked as a corrupting influence, and barred from all Carthax space." Sarah felt the enormity of what was being proposed. Was being asked to defend not just herself, but her entire species' philosophy. "I accept," she said, because there was no other choice. The trial was scheduled for 3 days later, giving Sarah time to prepare her arguments, and the entire station buzzed with anticipation. Rask and Ven, recovered enough from their injuries to move around, visited Sarah in her quarters. "You do not have to do this," Ven said quietly. "You could leave the station and be safe." "And abandon you both?" Sarah asked with a slight smile. "After all the work we have done together?" Rask paced nervously. "The council elders are very wise, and they have debated philosophy for centuries. How can you hope to convince them?" "By telling the truth," Sarah replied simply, "about what humans have learned, and what we could teach the Carthax if they are willing to learn." On the day of the trial, the council chamber was packed, with observers from dozens of species, because word had spread, that something unprecedented was happening. Sarah stood, once again, in the chamber's center. But this time, she was not surrounded by hostile predators. Instead, she faced a panel of 5 elder council members, with Vrask at the center. "Dr. Sarah Chen," Vrask began formally, "you stand trial not for crimes, but for philosophies. You claim that human understanding of strength and wisdom can benefit the Carthax people." "I do," Sarah confirmed. "Then make your case," Vrask commanded. Sarah had spent 3 days preparing, but she set aside her notes and spoke from the heart instead. "The Carthax are apex predators from a harsh world," she began. "You have evolved to dominate through strength, and you have built an empire through conquest. But you ask me, what comes next?" She paused, making eye contact with each council member. "You have conquered 100 worlds, yet your population does not grow. You have the most powerful fleet in this sector, yet you have no new colonies, and you maintain rigid traditions, yet your young are restless." Some council members shifted uncomfortably. "You have reached the limits of what pure dominance can achieve," Sarah continued. Strength won you an empire, but strength alone cannot help you grow beyond it. What would you have us do? One elder demanded. Become weak like the prey species? No, Sarah said firmly. I would have you become strong in new ways. She activated her own holographic display, showing images of human cities, research stations, artistic achievements. Humans learned that cooperation amplifies strength, she explained. One human can lift a heavy weight, but 10 humans working together can move mountains. And one human can have a good idea, but 1,000 humans sharing ideas can transform worlds. You speak of collectivism, another elder said with distaste. The Carthax value individual strength. So do humans, Sarah countered, but we learned that individual strength reaches its full potential when combined with collective purpose. Vrask leaned forward. Sarah thought for a moment, then pointed to War Leader Cross, who was watching from the medical section. War Leader Cross is individually strong, she said, but his true strength comes from commanding a fleet where thousands of warriors work together toward common goals, and each warrior maintains their individual strength while contributing to collective power. She saw understanding dawn in some eyes. This is already the Carthax way in military matters, Sarah continued. I am simply suggesting you expand this principle to other areas of your society. Such as, Vrask prompted, education, research, cultural development, Sarah listed. All the things that species need to thrive across generations, not just survive. One of the elders who had been silent until now spoke up. The human makes interesting points, but she has not addressed the core question. If we adopt these ways, what do we become? Sarah met his gaze. You become yourselves, but with more tools to face the future. And you remain Carthax. You remain predators, but you channel that nature into protection and exploration and creation, instead of only conquest. Pretty words, the elder said skeptically. But what proof do you offer that this actually works? Look at Rask and Ven, Sarah said simply. 3 months ago they were trying to kill each other. Today they work together and solve problems that neither could solve alone. And are they weaker? She paused. Ask War Leader Cross if his sons are weaker now. All eyes turned to Cross, who struggled to his feet despite his injuries. My sons are stronger, he said clearly. Not in the ways our traditions measure, but in ways that will serve them better in the centuries to come. Vrask studied Sarah for a long moment, his mechanical eye whirring as it focused. You have made your case, human. And now we will deliberate. The council withdrew to private chambers while Sarah waited with growing anxiety. The council deliberated for 6 hours while Sarah waited in an observation room with Rask and Ven. The cubs had refused to leave her side, and their presence was both comforting and added pressure, because she knew their futures depended on the council's decision. War Leader Cross joined them after the medical team cleared him for limited movement. His shattered leg was healing, but he would need weeks of regeneration therapy before returning to full combat capability. Whatever happens, Cross said quietly, you have changed things that cannot be unchanged. Sarah wanted to believe him, but she could not shake the feeling that everything hung by a thread. Finally, a summons came, and they all returned to the council chamber, where the 5 elders sat in judgment. Vrask rose to deliver the verdict, and the ancient warrior's expression was unreadable. The council has considered Dr. Chen's arguments and the evidence of her work with the cubs, he began. We have also studied human history and debated the implications of adopting new philosophical approaches. Sarah held her breath. The vote was not unanimous, Vrask continued, but a majority has decided that the potential benefits outweigh the risks. He paused, letting the tension build. Therefore, the council approves a cultural exchange program between humans and Carthax, and Dr. Chen's work with the cubs will continue under council oversight with the goal of developing new training protocols. Relief flooded through Sarah, but Vrask was not finished. However, the ancient Carthax added, This approval comes with conditions. The program will be evaluated every 6 months, and if the Council determines that Carthax's strength is being compromised, it will be terminated immediately. I understand, Sarah said. Furthermore, Vrask continued, War Leader Cross will be granted extended leave from Fleet Command to work directly with Dr. Chen on developing these new protocols, and other Carthax families may volunteer their cubs for the program, but participation will not be mandatory. One of the other elders stood. This was the one who had been most skeptical during the trial. I voted against this decision, he announced, but I will abide by the Council's will, and I challenge Dr. Chen to prove me wrong. Sarah nodded respectfully. I accept your challenge. As the chamber emptied, Vrask approached Sarah privately. You should know that your performance during the trial impressed even those who voted against you, he said. You argued with strength and wisdom, a combination we. Thank you, Elder Vrask, Sarah replied. The ancient warrior's mechanical eye focused on her. I have been alive for 347 years, and I have seen the Carthax reach the peak of military power. But I have also seen us become stuck there, unable to move forward or back. He gestured to Rask and Ven, who were being examined by medical staff. Those cubs represent something new, and new things are dangerous, but also necessary for species survival. Over the following weeks, the station's atmosphere gradually shifted as word of the Council's decision spread, and some Carthax remained hostile to the idea of human influence, but others were curious. Sarah and Cross worked together to develop training protocols that combined Carthax traditional strength conditioning with human approaches to cooperation and problem-solving. The first volunteer families brought their cubs hesitantly, and Sarah noticed that they watched everything with intent. Predatory suspicion. But as the cubs began to show results, completing complex tasks through teamwork and developing skills that pure strength could not achieve, more families started to volunteer. Commander Threx reappeared after weeks of absence. His pride had been shattered in the arena, and he had withdrawn from public life. But now he approached Sarah with a request that surprised everyone. I wish to observe the training, he said stiffly, clearly uncomfortable asking for anything. Sarah studied him carefully. Why? Because I do not understand what happened in the arena, Threx admitted. You stopped my killing strike, as if I were a cub, and you could have broken my arm, but you chose not to. He paused, struggling with words. I need to understand why. Sarah considered refusing, but then remembered her own words about strength and wisdom. You may observe, she agreed, but if you interfere with the cub's development, you will be understood, Threx said, and there was something like respect in his voice. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. Threx went from hostile observer to active participant, and he began asking questions about human philosophy, and even started working with some of the older cubs who needed help channeling their aggressive tendencies. War Leader Cross watched this transformation with obvious satisfaction. You have done in months what I thought would take generations, he told Sarah one evening. They were observing a mixed group of cubs working together on a construction project that required both strength and coordination. The cubs are remarkable, Sarah replied. They learn so quickly when given the chance. I am not speaking only of the cubs, Cross said. Threx was the most rigid traditionalist in the fleet, and now he asks questions about cooperation and collective strength. Sarah smiled. People can change when they see evidence that challenges their beliefs. Like I changed, Cross said quietly. Sarah looked at him. You were already changing before we met, and you just needed someone to show you that change was possible. The months stretched into a year, and Sarah's cultural exchange program expanded beyond just cubs to include adult Carthax who wanted to learn new approaches to old problems. Research teams formed that combined Carthax strength with human creativity. Engineering projects that would have been impossible for either species alone became achievable through cooperation. The galactic community took notice as the Carthax, long known as isolationist warriors, began forming genuine partnerships with other species. Sarah was eventually promoted to coordinator of interspecies development programs, a position created specifically for her work. Rask and Ven grew into young adults. They were not traditional Carthax warriors, but they were something new. Strong enough to command respect, but wise enough to know when strength was not the answer. 10 years after Sarah had stopped that first fight between the cubs, she stood in the same training room where it had all begun. The room had been expanded several times to accommodate the growing program, and now dozens of cubs trained there under the supervision of both human and Carthax instructors. Rask and Ven had become junior officers in the fleet. They served under their father, who had returned to command with new perspectives on leadership. Sarah's hair showed streaks of gray now, and she moved a bit slower than she had a decade ago, but her eyes still held the same determination. A new group of cubs entered for their first session, nervous and aggressive as all young Carthax were, and Sarah smiled because she knew what they would become. War Leader Cross approached with an elderly human male in tow. "Dr. Chen, I would like to introduce Admiral Marcus Webb. Has come from Earth to observe our program." The Admiral shook Sarah's hand. "Dr. Chen, your work here has become legendary back home, and the Council wants to establish similar programs with other species." "The Carthax were willing to try something new," Sarah said modestly. "That is what made this possible." "More than willing," Cross corrected. "We were desperate for change, even if we did not know it." Admiral Webb watched the cubs training. "How many species are participating in the program now?" 17, Sarah replied, "and we have requests from 12 more." The Admiral nodded approvingly. "You have proven that even the most different species can learn from each other." That evening, there was a ceremony to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Cultural Exchange Program. And the grand arena, where Sarah had once stopped a killing blow, was now filled with representatives from dozens of species. Elder Vrask, now 400 years old, spoke. Even more scarred than before, gave a speech about the transformation of Carthax society. 10 years ago we were powerful but stagnant, he said, his voice still strong despite his age. Today we are powerful and growing, and we have learned that strength comes in many forms. He gestured to Sarah. One human female showed us that protecting the young matters more than proving dominance, and that choosing mercy requires more strength than choosing violence. The crowd roared approval, not just Carthax, but members of species who had benefited from the changes rippling through the galactic community. Later, as the celebration wound down, Sarah stood with Cross and watched Rask and Ven coordinating a demonstration for younger cubs. "They have grown into fine warriors," Cross said with obvious pride. "They have grown into more than warriors," Sarah corrected gently. "They have become leaders who understand that strength and wisdom must walk together." "Together," Maycross nodded, "as have we all." Commander Threx approached. He had been promoted to Admiral of the 5th Fleet, and his transformation from rigid traditionalist to advocate for change had been remarkable. "Dr. Chen, Admiral," he said formally, "I wanted to thank you before I depart for the frontier systems." "For what?" Sarah asked. "For showing me that admitting I was wrong required more courage than maintaining pride," Threx replied. 10 years ago I would have died rather than change, but today I command a fleet that values cooperation as much as strength." After he left, Sarah turned to Cross. "Do you ever regret the changes?" The war leader considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of the old ways, when everything was clear and hierarchy was absolute." He paused, watching the cubs work together. "But then I see what we have built and what we are becoming, and I know we made the right choice." Smiled. "The galaxy is full of apex predators, but the deadliest ones are those who know when not to kill. And those who protect the young," Cross added, "no matter whose young they are." In the training room below, A new generation of Carthax cubs worked alongside human children, and the young of a dozen other species. They were learning cooperation and problem-solving and conflict resolution. They were learning that strength without wisdom was just violence, and that wisdom without strength was just words. But together, combined with compassion and purpose, they created something greater. They were learning to build civilization. And in a quiet corner of the room, almost unnoticed, a small monument had been placed. A holographic image, frozen in time, showing Sarah holding two fighting cubs apart, her hands positioned to kill, but choosing instead to protect. Beneath it, in both human and Carthax script, was a simple inscription: "Strength is knowing when not to use it."